introduce the founder and CEO of the new site Rappler, the journalist, author, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, directly from the airport and ready to talk to us about truth and trust and how technology is affecting our rights to freedom of information. Please give her a warm welcome, Maria Ressa.
Okay,
Maria,
I just
we're all yours.
Hi. When Ingvild was introducing me, I was like, oh my God, that's me. I'm speaking. Can I get a clicker? Is that... oh, I forgot to ask. So, let me riff. I see it. I see it here. Thank you. Wonderful. I really literally just got off the plane. That is what the Nobel has done. So look, from what I have heard, how wonderful to be in the room with you and to be back. This is my third time back in Oslo since December, so I am thrilled to be here and to be in the Peace Institute. I'll quickly, 10 minutes, talk about courage. And part of it is because it sounds like the day so far has been not just telling each other what the problems are, because we certainly know what they are, we're living through it, but hopefully going to, what are we going to do, right? That's what I hope to get to. And here's the thing. I just put in my book last night at midnight. Graphics, galleys, it went in. So I have 5 lessons from it. So where are we with courage? Well, look, the last time at the Nobel lecture, I talked about a person-to-person defense of our democracy, right? Because what are we dealing with? It's death by 1,000 cuts. And you think about that in terms of states, but it is also very personal to everyone in this room. It's death by 1,000 cuts of your hopes, your dreams, your integrity, right? So kind of look at it that way with me, micro, macro. And when that happens to you, it's happened to me. You just have to bust through it. And I see Peter in the back. Hi, Peter. You bust through it, and I come out of it with this thing of embrace your fear. Whatever it is you're most afraid of, you have to touch it, hold it, i.e. think that the world is going to turn fascist. And what are we going to do? It's much harder when it happens. It's easier right when we're on the precipice, which is where we are right now. If we go, I just got the report from VDEM, if we go by where we are, which is there are less democracies in the world today, we're back at 1989 numbers. You just have to look at the Philippines. We had presidential elections on May 9th this year, and there's no better example of the impact of disinformation and our kind of crazy information ecosystem when we watched history change in front of our eyes, right? There are 32 elections this year. Kenya just finished. You have Brazil coming up. And it is the same existential problem. You're seeing a kind of stop the steal meta-narrative being seeded on social media. If we follow the trend, so we have Brazil in October, the US midterms in November. Next year you have Africa nations, you have Turkey. By 2024, we have Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population. You have India, the world's largest democracy. And then the US presidential elections. If we follow the trend that we're at and we don't do something now, I think 2024 will be the year we fall off the cliff. That will be the end of democracy. We will have elected enough illiberal leaders that the geopolitical balance of power will shift and democracy will die. I said I would be hopeful, right? So at least we know the problem, right? So we embrace our fear. What are we going to do? Well, every person in this room is very powerful. So I'm going to ask you for your courage, because that will determine our future. So here's my update. Ingvild asked me to just quickly tell you what's happened to us since then. Well, and this leads to our second panel. the attacks online have increased. So it's not just information operations on social media, it's not just information warfare on social media, it is also like quick things, death by 1,000 cuts, distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks. You guys familiar with that, right? Because it started with the Nobel stream in December from Oslo to Manila. So the Nobel Foundation said that that stream was targeted on that day. But then I went home and all the media organizations, the news organizations in the Philippines were attacked all together. And then it just got worse. We found like this hacker group that was mounting attacks against the major Philippine news outlets, and then our government praised them. That's the upside down world. Welcome, right? And then we dug deeper with a Swedish group. We found that there was one man in Davao City who was at the core of it. Davao City is where former President Duterte, that's his home base. So we found this guy. Once we talked to him, the DDoS attacks stopped. But then we looked at where they were recruiting people, and it was on Facebook. So Facebook took him down. Hi, Khadija. That's the first, DDoS attacks. The second is that they didn't just come frontally, they came in the back end. So check your websites. Guys, who knows what black hat SEO attacks are? Yeah, you gotta know. Yay, the black hat SEO attacks, meaning they take junk links to AI-generated stuff. Some of them on easily, like these are sites that Google could do something about and has, I hope. But what this means is it sends death by 1,000 cuts, tens of thousands of junk links to your website, in our case, to Philippine news groups. So we as an industry were under attack. And when we looked at it, you have to like physically actually annul these links, tens of thousands, right? So it takes your time. It just takes time and time. And we weren't the only ones. All the news organizations, what this means is you have less people finding your site, less people finding the news. So this was something, I stopped working for Rappler. We just started telling all the Philippine news organizations how they were being insidiously attacked behind the scenes. And guess what? One of the largest ones was a commercial black hat SEO operator from Sweden. And that company not only like attacks you with tens of thousands, but then asks you to pay them to take it down. It's really interesting. Here's the third one. So anyway, if that's happening to news sites in the Philippines, it's got to be happening to others, right? It just takes a while to find that death by 1,000 cuts on the back end. This is the third thing, the third and last update of what happened. It's the weaponization of the law. In January this year, we had a dozen cyber libel complaints, right? You know I have 7 existing criminal cases now. Rappler has 8, but in order to be here, I have to ask for court permission. Norway and the Nobel always gets me court permission. Thank you. But here's what happened after I got back. We had these complaints, they're cyber libel complaints. Kibuloy is the pastor of former President Duterte. He's also wanted by the FBI for sex trafficking. His site is kind of like a pseudo news site that is the fastest growing, attacks all the news groups in the Philippines. And they have just been awarded a franchise. One of the franchises of ABS-CBNs was given to them. Well, so here's what happened. We had that, and then we found out that, will our justice system work? So it was thrown out. The first 7 were thrown out by April. But also in April, we found out that, there were more that we didn't even know about, because this is death by 1,000 cuts, right? There were cases that were filed in different remote provinces of the Philippines, and we had to take time to respond to those. Otherwise, you get an arrest warrant, because cyber libel, as you know, is criminal in the Philippines, right? Well, by April, we actually had 16 more complaints and 50 counts of cyber libel. This is really just to harass you, right? So that you take your eye off the ball. Well, here's the best part. All of them have been thrown out. all, including the one in Davao City. So you see, there's hope. But then that wasn't enough, around, when was this? And the end of June, the Philippines reiterated we lost at the SEC again. In April, well, around, I guess this would have been June, we were told that we needed to shut down. That's another one of those moments. And I was like, no, you're going to have, I can't say this because you're watching, Philippines. So, but we decided to keep going because we're not violating anything in the Constitution. So every day we go to work and we're not sure whether we will get shut down that day. And at the same time, because we're doing well, I'm trying to recruit people to a company that may or may not get shut down. It's kind of a strange place to be. And then, of course, this is the last thing that happened. It's really slow. July, my colleague and I lost the appeal at the Court of Appeals on cyber libel. And then the decision added more jail time. You have to laugh. You have to laugh. So that's my update for you, right? More attacks, more insidious death by 1,000 cuts attacks online, more attacks, death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, that's like more cases this year than I've had in the last 6 years. But there's an upside to it. Most of them have been thrown out. The ones that have progressed, it means we're going to be arguing this at the Supreme Court. It means it's a very high-stakes game of chicken, and you cannot veer off course. We hold the line. So let me then go to how does this come back to you, and what are we going to do about it? Because I promised you that. The person-to-person defense of our democracy, short, medium, and long term. The long term we already know, and the academics will have said this. There have been numerous reports. Education, it's like everything. The medium term, the EU has taken this. It's legislation. It's necessary. The social media platforms, the technology companies are not going to do this voluntarily. There must be legislation, and the EU is paving the way. The Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. Too late for the Philippines, but it kicks in spring next year. And then in the short term, this is where it's person to person and where we can do much more together. This is where we have to figure out what civic engagement looks like in the age of exponential propaganda, in the age of a behavioral modification system that is our information highway. Right? So what is that? I have an example for you. We tried this in the Philippines. We didn't do it long enough. For our elections, we decided, and we worked with the Google News Initiative and with another, a tech-based kind of pipeline called Midan. It's San Francisco-based. But look, it's a whole-of-society approach. That's what I wind up calling it. But it starts with this pyramid. So we started it really, truly in February because it took a few weeks to set up, but 16 news organizations working together for fact-checking. Fact-checking is really boring, right? And you used to think this was like implicit in everything a news organization does. On the internet, fact-checking is critical. So for the first time, these 16 news groups, nationwide and local, hyper-local news groups, we worked together. And it was fantastic to do that. Everything that we created was Creative Commons. Anyone can repurpose, anyone can repost. And then the second layer is the most important part. Because remember, fact checks are really boring. They don't spread on social media, which is how Filipinos get our news. So we created the mesh layer. Mesh, these are civil society groups. Business finally joined. Power and money's got to come into this battle. The church, Asia, the Philippines is Asia's largest Roman Catholic nation. And what we did is we told the mesh, so Nobel Peace Center, for example, right? We organized ourselves so that the mesh shares these fact checks and they add emotion because it's a thinking fast distribution system. It needs emotion, and we journalists aren't very good at that. So mesh, and look, it was actually really good. And I got the idea for mesh. Did you guys watch that movie, Don't Look Up? You remember how the planetary system came together, bit by bit by bit? Mesh, it was a mesh. It created a mesh before to throw off the asteroid. So the mesh was the distribution system, and it worked. Anyway, the third part is research. If the first is to create truth, the second is to distribute, the third is to analyze. And this is the first time 7 research groups came together with the data pipeline that we all could see, right? So the data pipeline brought that. And every week, we did a webinar where each research group would come out with their finding and tell our public, our people, who's doing what meta-narrative, what lie is being seeded, who benefits from this, who is the target. So the research groups did that. We did 21 research groups, research papers, and these are now all being peer-reviewed, but we reversed the academic cycle. Instead of peer review and then media, it was like, atomize it first, bring it to the public first, because you need to do that, and then it'll go to the peer reviews after. But we checked each other, right? So there's lots of stuff. That was incredible. 21 in from March to May. 21, that's pretty cool. And the last one, the one that's most important, is the law. Where the heck are all the lawyers? Because impunity online is impunity offline, right? If there is no rule of law online, how do you expect our rule of law in the real world to survive? It hasn't. That is the erosion, right? So what happened here is that our legal groups in the Philippines came together, and what they did is they filed more than 23 legal cases, strategic and tactical litigation that helped protect the journalists who were being attacked, that helped protect the academics, because now history is under attack. So the academics are feeling the heat that the journalists have felt before. This worked for a period of time, but not enough to stop the overwhelming win of a new Marcos, the namesake of our former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He's our new president. But it works. And how do I know it works? The impact it created. Within the first 2 weeks that we rolled this out, the Solicitor General, the Office of the Solicitor General, filed a petition at the Supreme Court against Rappler and the Commission on Elections, calling fact-checking illegal, saying that it is prior restraint. We fought that also, and it's gone, but it was at the Supreme Court. So, all right, let me just come with the 5 lessons. Now, this is for you. I tell you, I just finished it. So, at the Nobel lecture, I asked you, what will you sacrifice for the truth? And I realized that, in writing this book, I wrote 400 pages that got edited down to 200. These are the lessons that I put in there. And they may sound really naive, but I think that's what the world needs. Remember when I pulled out the t-shirt that said, in order to be the good, you have to believe there is good in the world? That's the part that social media has taken away from us. That emergent human behavior that is coming out today emphasizes fear, anger, hatred. It makes us our worst selves. So remember these things. This is what I'm told by my publishers I should say. Inside the book, when you read the book, in the book, I actually go through and show you the data behind all of this, right? But, lesson number 1 for me is learn. You're here. Learn. This is a time when it seems like the world is falling apart, which it is. But last night I was with a climate scientist who was optimistic. I think that's the most existential problem we face, and we cannot fix climate if we do not fix our information ecosystem, right? How can we get the right information to you? So learn. The studies also show that the people in the middle, the people like us, are the ones who are quiet. they said that the most extreme 6% are the ones that are taking over the information ecosystem. So don't bury your head in the sand, right? The second, speak. Speak. I was on the same stage where Salman Rushdie was attacked in Chautauqua, New York. And, you know, it was a community that had been together for 149 years. And when I sat, it seats 2,000, 3,000 people. And when I sat and spoke in front of the community, I had to face my fear because I was like, oh my gosh, how could that happen, right? It was in front of so many people that he was stabbed. And this is a man who dealt with a fatwa for speaking. And someone said, don't go. And I was like, no, we go. And I went, and I was so glad I did because I could see a community that was shattered, but yet came back together, believed in the community, believed in the good. And it was fantastic to speak to them because if you don't speak, you say everything is okay. Silence is consent. And now, at this time, you can't be quiet if something in your area of influence is wrong. This is the time to clean up our areas of influence. The third, you've heard me say a lot. I've been saying it since 2016. Draw the line where on this side you're good and on this side you're evil. It has to be that clear in your head because that's how you act. Because this is also a time to act, right? The fourth is, this sounds naive again, we have to trust. Because that's what's been broken. So each of us in our area of influence, even if our families are being torn apart, we trust. Our families are easier because we love. That's the other part. Love, right, is connected to this. But trust. What's being used to manipulate us is fear, anger, hate. So think slow, not fast. Us against them, when you run into that, and there are many ways to talk about that. It could be, it's now part of state ideology in Hungary. It's moving in all different parts of the world. We need to avoid that. And Europe, more than any part of the world, understands what could happen when us against them is pushed to the nth point. We have to grow the shared reality. In the Nobel lecture, I talked about that shared reality being anchored by facts, right? And then finally, the last one, again, sounds crazy, but we have to have faith. I'm not a religious person, but more than at any other time, it's kind of connected. So I went back to this thing from the Bible. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's an empathy that can get lost. Again, on social media, so if you're not on social media, stay off. Hi, Facebook live stream. And then that last part, right? These are my lessons. People ask me, how do you find the courage? It's in these 5 things. Because it's actually not about fighting something. It's about holding the line on who you are, who you want to be. And I think this is the part that is exciting. Everything is falling apart. The world is insane right now. Our politics, I already told you, 2024, please do something. It's also exciting in a weird way because we're going to create the world we want. And the world we want is actually better than where we are today. You know, that's what I think. So, please, you have to ask yourself the same question. What are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? That shared reality, because your courage will help determine our future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Maria Ressa. Listening to you is always inspiring and scary at the same time. Thank you for waking us up. You will be joining the discussions afterward. We're looking forward to that. A lot of things to discuss. But now we're going to go to Iowa for our next speaker. She's a specialist in algorithm product management, and she became world famous when she spoke up about what she found alarming when she was working for Facebook. She saw how the company was putting profit over people's safety and decided to blow the whistle on the company she worked with. Since then, she's testified for the US Congress, the UK and EU parliaments, and now she's talking to us from Iowa in the US. Here she is, Frances Haugen.
I know it can feel overwhelming listening to all the challenges about social media. It can seem like there's no hope. There's no way that we can move forward. But the reality is, every single time we've invented a new communication technology, we've seen pretty similar things happen. We think this moment is special. We feel overwhelmed because it happens to be this is the time that we're living through this period of change. When we invented the printing press, the cheap printing press, also known as newspapers, the telegraph, radio, every single one of these systems had periods where they were very disruptive. With newspapers, we had things like yellow journalism and people starting wars over misinformation. With radio, we had people for the first time having very intense emotional relationships at scale with their elected leaders. And this played out pretty disastrously in things like World War II. We learned, though. Each time we've experienced this before, we've seen the period of disruption. We've analyzed it. We've figured out what were the levers that were causing these problems, and we acted. We founded journalism schools to teach people about journalistic ethics. We set up codes of practice and ways of sanctioning people who cross those lines. We developed codes about ownership of media because we understood that people could weaponize new forms of communication in order to accomplish their aims. We invested in things like public information, public news sources, things that weren't driven by economics. The way we're going to move forward with social media is we have to understand how we got here. We have to understand what were the incentives that led us from something pretty innocuous, something we liked a lot. Facebook of 2008 was what most people today would describe Facebook to be. You ask the average person on the street, what is Facebook? And they'll say, Facebook is about my family and my friends. But the reality is we haven't had that Facebook for a very long time. Facebook was faced with a really basic challenge. Every quarter, it needed you to view a little bit more content because they're a private company. They have to make their shareholders happy. And the way they do that is they get you to consume more content and they put more ads in there. That's where they make their money. If we don't talk about the incentives of these systems, if we talk about the dynamics that come out of those incentives, we won't be able to reform them. Most companies are private companies, but we don't have conversations about those companies, about the scale of these problems that we do as we do with social media. And the reason for that is twofold. First, almost every other, or I think every other similarly powerful industry is meaningfully more transparent than social media is. Other than Twitter, which has given us access to their fire hose, that's a stream of all their tweets, no other major social media company has actively worked towards transparency. And the reason for that is pretty simple. If we don't know how these systems work, if we don't see what the consequences of their choices are, if we don't understand what choices were made, we can't form our own independent muscle of accountability. The public muscle of accountability is how we move any system, be it a communication system or another technology, back towards the common good. Because the reality is it will always be cheaper to make more dangerous products. Doing a good job costs money, and only sometimes does it bring more profits. We need to demand transparency. We need to demand access to being able to ask our own questions and get our own answers. And the reason for that is every other similarly powerful industry exists in an ecosystem of accountability. That means litigators that know what it means to cut a corner so they can hold people negligent if they prioritize profits over people. It means investors who prioritize long-term growth, helping to steer companies away from overly aggressive short-term optimizations. It It means academics who can develop their own frameworks to guide us in how to think about these problems. It means regulators that understand where they can actually make a difference. Right now, we don't get to have any of those things because the companies have kept the doors closed. They knew as long as they hid behind the curtain, as long as all we could see was our own screens, that they would be able to act without accountability. So the first step forward is just demanding actually being able to see what's going on, demanding access to open APIs, to fire hoses of content, to the things laid out in the Digital Services Act. Because unless we have the ability to control our own perspectives on these systems, to ask our own questions, we will continue to see the problems that have plagued us over the last 10 years. We can do this. We can have social media that we feel good about, that's good for us, but the only way we're going to get it is by working for it. But we can do it, and we've done it before. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much to Frances Haugen. And Maria Ressa, I want to ask you, what did it mean that Frances Haugen blew the whistle on Facebook the way she did?
It was, well, she validated everything we knew. You know what I mean? Like, we could feel it, we could feel the impact, but then she's extremely articulate, she's seen the data, and then that was when I think America woke up. I think the EU has been slightly ahead of it, but it's still not enough. Frances was talking about something that just opens the kimono, right? Sorry, I shouldn't even say that. That's now not politically. But Frances is talking about something that more transparency. And she's talking about stopping the impunity. That still is going to take time. So this is part of the reason I'm actually really excited for what the Peace Institute did with our 10-point action plan later, which we'll tell you about.
And luckily, we have more time to discuss these issues.
Yes.
So you can have a seat here in the panel.
Okay.
And I will welcome Ingrid Stolpestad from Amnesty International Norway. She will lead the discussion now on how we can tame technology. Welcome, Ingrid. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to see so many awake people still here after this long and very interesting day. We are up for a very interesting discussion, I think. We've heard several times today how digital platforms tend to amplify content that we don't want. Disinformation, online violence, and content that really undermine our democracies. At the same time, of course, digital platforms are probably our most important infrastructure for communication and information. So, what to do? We're going to come back to that, but first we're going to dig more into the threats to a safe digital information space. And to help Maria and me with that, I'm going to invite Bruce Metzvairo up to the stage. Please come up, Bruce. Bruce is Professor of Media and Performance Studies at the University of Utrecht, and you have studied extensively the link between social media and conflict. So I would like to start with you, really. If you can explain to us what are the connections between the digital platforms that we are so active on today and real-life conflict? And please, if you have any examples.
Okay. Thanks very much for having me. I think where to start? Perhaps I would start with the current research that we are doing with colleagues, since we're in Norway, with colleagues based here in Norway, funded by the Norwegian Research Council. And it's trying to look at how social media exacerbates conflict in Mali and Ethiopia. So we are using these two countries as comparative case studies. And so far, we already have some preliminary results. What we have done was to actually go to these two countries and assemble journalists, fact checkers, all the key stakeholders in the media ecosystems in these countries. And what we are actually seeing is indeed from the preliminary results that there is that link. And what causes that in these countries? Ethiopia, for example, you see that, I mean, one of the young lady who started one of the only two fact-checking organizations in Ethiopia. I mean, it's a country of more than 20 million people, but there are only two organizations that are really deeply engaged in fact-checking activities. What she was saying, and you asked for an example, is that somebody based in Ethiopian diasporic community somewhere, maybe in the States or here in Europe, sent a message saying his father, they were living in the south of Ethiopia, saying his father was a traitor, just simply because he didn't belong to the same ethnicity as the people living in this region were. And obviously, these people, they took that message and they went and attacked her entire family. Her father was left for dead, basically, and they had to move to Addis Ababa, the capital city, for safety. This was just somebody who, without any evidence, just decided simply because his father, who was a businessman operating in a region for which most of the people did not belong to his ethnicity, was targeted by these lies, and it was amplified, obviously, on social media, and they were grossly attacked. And she, obviously, from a living experience, decided to start one of the two fact-checking organizations in Ethiopia. I think what is really important here is to, of course, realize that social media is weaponizing various actors. You've used that word just now. Actors can easily coordinate. People in this, I think we all know Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. I think today we also, at least in the case of Ethiopia, because of course it's always important to contextualize these things. You know, we can't universalize everything. Every country is different. But in the Ethiopian case, what we are actually seeing is it's not just the medium which is the message, but the messenger is actually the message, because people will trust based on who actually is saying what is being said. So in this case, because you have in a country there are more than 70 ethnicities, people who truth to them depends on who is saying it, who is behind it. So if somebody who shares the same ethnicity like me says something, then I don't even need to check. That's the truth. If this person comes from a different tribe or ethnicity, then I should not even bother, because he doesn't represent what I believe. And that is the danger, and that is what we are seeing, and that's why social media is a problem.
But this, then it might be easy maybe to think that, well, isn't this the fault of the person who is sending the message? And I would like to ask you, Maria Ressa, what is then the role of the tech platforms in this? Why isn't this the fault? Why are we looking at the platforms and not the people who are actually sending the message?
Because the people have been manipulated. It is us against them, and I disagree. I think it's not different for every country. I mean, when you talk about that, let's talk in Myanmar. Both Facebook, before it was called Meta, so Facebook and the UN sent fact-finding missions there. The UN one was led by an Indonesian, Marzuki Darusman, and they both came out of it saying that genocide was essentially enabled by the social media platforms. It's been like one of those words that they say, well, it's really up to the people, it's the people. It's not. This is where it becomes a behavior modification system, right? And you know the terms gaslighting, Julie Passetti, define. No, gaslighting, right? Now, if the person the person in power is lying, and you're the person who say they're lying, that person, all they have to do is to mobilize 1 million bots or 1 million fake accounts to say you're lying. I'm not a criminal, but I am. You know, like how do you trust? You can't. So gaslighting is one phrase that gains new meaning in our world. The other one is dog whistle, right? The case of Carol Cadwallader in the UK, she was the one who broke the Cambridge Analytica story, and yet, you know, there were people who you would otherwise think real people, not, this is another out for Facebook, where they only looked at accounts for many, many years that were coordinated inauthentic behavior, what they called CIB. But this is coordinated authentic behavior. So after January 6th, when Silicon Valley since came home to roost, they came out with a policy called brigading, when real people are the ones who are incited to do this, and then they finally have a policy. So that Facebook, you know, the 300 Facebook accounts who were doing DDoS attacks that they took down was under that case. Look, the incentives to incite, to make you angry. The minute you're angry, they push to hate. Ethiopia is one of the countries that were in the 10,000 plus documents released by Frances Haugen. You can see it there. What actually the platforms have shown us, the tech companies have shown us, is how much more we human beings have in common versus what keeps us apart. Our biology is the same cross countries, cross cultures, and we are being manipulated through that, right? E.O. Wilson, he passed away last December. He's an a scientist who studies emergent behavior in ants, right? So think emergent behavior in humans. He said our greatest problem is our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology.
Frances Haugen, 1 year ago, or almost a year ago, when the Facebook papers were released, or the stories were published, she showed how the algorithms of the social media platforms actually amplify hatred and so on. Then at the same time, and anger, at the same time, many are calling for increased moderation. What do you think, with your experiences, Bruce, in your context, would that be a good solution?
Well, moderation could help, but I think what we need is to, again, I'm sorry, I think we need to understand the context obviously always differs. You were talking about some countries where, you know, the digital divide is still quite a big issue. So, okay, you know, we have misinformation and disinformation. It's a really big problem. But for example, in Ethiopia, people listen to the radio more than they use social media. But the problem is, social media is used by the journalists as the sources. So they get the source of their information is from social media, and of course they then take that and use it to broadcast or share with the people. So when you talk to people on the ground and you ask them a question like that, you know, would moderation help them? I think it's more like problematic in the sense that they don't really have a hand themselves in so far as, you know, playing a role in that moderation is concerned. They are mostly on the receiving end of social media. It could work, but we also need to think about how would we do it. You know, who is going to be moderating it, and you know, when all these aspects. It will need to be we will need to really think about the practicalities of doing it. Of course, it is. It could work if you try to look at it from a Western societies where we have established strong institutions. Where people who break the law can actually face the music. If you are in countries where there hardly any strong or any institutions exist, I don't know how that would really help, because to them, the situation is just the same, whether you moderate or you don't, because the elite or the political elites are in charge and everything that they say goes. And I think I was listening to your presentation. In some countries, it's even worse than what Maria was saying. So I think the problem, indeed, we have a problem with the social media companies, but we also have to rethink our political systems, our political approaches, because the problem is we are talking about social media, but I think we have a bigger problem here, which is not just social media, which is also thinking about how do we actually deal with these dictatorships, which are tormenting us, or which use social media to target journalists like Maria Ressa and others. And I think that should be the problem, because I don't think Facebook and Twitter and others would really want to do this unless if it's in their interest. Of course, if they are going to lose money, they will probably not want to do it. Of course, if it's the European Parliament or European Commission saying that, they will have to listen because they have no opportunity. But not everybody across the world is as strong as the European Parliament, and we need to think about that as well.
And they're not as strong anymore. I mean, I'll respond to just say,
yes,
no,
please.
Content moderation will not be enough. I mean, not to...
And would it even be good if big tech decides what we're allowed to say?
So I think what I've been trying to say is that we have lost agency. Right? This is like Soma in Brave New World. So you kind of think of, here, let's describe the system that we're in. The system is, when you type in something on any social media platform, that stuff over time is pulled together by machine learning so that this way they build a model of you, right? You can call that cloning, right? So you're essentially, your private thoughts, it becomes your clone. There's a clone of you that knows you better than you know yourself, right? And that clone of yours is then harnessed by artificial intelligence. The companies say they own it because they use machine learning to recreate you. They own your clone. Think about that, right? If somebody made a clone of you, do you own it? So they pull that up. That's the upstream problem. And that then is how they micro-target. Right? So AI takes all of the clones of all of us in the room. Imagine in a virtual world. Let's call it the upside down. In the upside down, there's all of us, the clones of us here. And then someone says, I want to target those people who are kind of weak. I want to make them smoke. And they pull it out, and they can. And then you will be nudged. And those who are weaker in that sense, it's built into who we are, will begin smoking. So what I was saying, and I think built into this, that connects to the politics and the rise of dictators, the rise of digital authoritarians that are democratically elected and who then cave democracies from within. That's what we've been saying. So when we have elections, when Brexit happened, and that is a societal thing. But think about it in 2016 when the political dominoes began to fall. Duterte was elected in the Philippines. A little more than a month later, you had Brexit. Then you had all of the elections coming up. By November, Donald Trump is elected, right? So we've gone through this. That's the problem. Who owns that data? And so four things come together that every legislator takes apart differently. Francis and I have testified for different countries together. It is data privacy, which we will talk about. It is antitrust. It is user safety, right? Like imagine if somebody can point a gun at you. I can point a gun at Christoph and I'll get away with impunity. That's what's happening online. And then the last one is content moderation. But by the time you talk moderation, the distribution has already gone crazy.
Yeah.
This is not a freedom of speech issue. It is the distribution problem. You know, when you amplify the lies over facts.
I will very soon we will welcome some new members to the panel. Before that, I want to ask you one final question in this session, and that is, we all remember 10, 12 years ago, we all believed that social media would be the way for change forward. That would be how it would create new revolutions. Where is that now? Do we still have that hope that social media also can have that positive democratizing effect? Bruce?
Well, I think social media could actually help us democratize. You know, we have a lot of examples where social media has been put to good use. The former president of Sudan vowed that he would never be removed from power, and vowed that, you know, social media protesters would never remove him from power. But ironically, they actually, as we now know, they actually removed him from power. So there are some examples where we've actually seen social media being put to good use. But what we really need is to rethink, you know, social media, to think about regulation. Do we need regulation? How are we going to do, you know, this regulation? Because we are now really faced left, right, and center by this misinformation, which is quite ubiquitous, and it has an impact on people's lives, particularly in countries that are non-democratic, because people there do not have a long-standing history with no rights. So to me, it's a double-edged sword, if you want. We can see the good signs, but there are also bad signs. What we need are people who are more responsible, and we'll probably win another Nobel Peace Prize if you knew how to actually make people more responsible, because, you know, it's a daunting task, but we wish everybody would.
Thank you, Maria. A short comment from you as well on that.
The people in charge of the companies have to be made responsible.
Yeah.
The impunity must stop at that point, and that is not going to happen. I mean, I had hopes, you know, social media for social change. That was, we created Rappler on social media, on Facebook, a decade ago, right? And it isn't, now it is probably the biggest menace we all face. And here's the problem. It's been 6, 7 years now, right, since 2016 when the dominoes began to fall. When you believe the ideology that you are fed, like repeated a million times, you're not going to change your mind quickly, right? And there is now a kind of a nervous system globally of the extreme far right that has moved to the center. Look at Brazil again. Bolsonaro was a far-right fringe figure until YouTube brought him to the mainstream and media amplified, right? So it is all the weaknesses of this. So our problem is, January 6th, again, like, what about those people who stormed the Capitol? They didn't change the way they thought. And in fact, if you fact check them, their cognitive bias kicks in and says, no, that's part of the conspiracy theories. There is a reason why conspiracy theories that were on the fringe is now in the mainstream, why people don't believe in wearing masks, why people don't believe in vaccines. These are all part, and now I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it will take far longer to deal with the social harm. So we must get the laws in place. Impunity must stop.
And that's what we're going to talk about now. So give a big hand to Bruce Musviro. Thank you so much.
Oh, I stay on. You're going to get tired of me.
Please welcome Alexandra Gese, member of the European Parliament from the Greens, and also one of the champions in European politics for the newly approved and groundbreaking Digital Services Act. And also Paul Nedregotten, chair of Norwegian Media Business Association, and also executive vice president for tech and data in a media. So we also have the business here present. So thank you for coming. As you all know, Maria Ressa, Dmitry Muratov received the Nobel Peace Prize for their exceptional journalistic work, which helps build democratic societies. And in your speech, which we all remember, I believe, you argued that one of the threats against this kind of journalism, again, are the tech giants, as we've been talking about repeatedly today. And I would like to ask you, Gese and Nedregotten, what are your thoughts on that statement, that the threats against journalism is the tech giants?
I agree.
Why?
Because the tech giants have established a system of commercial surveillance, which was perfectly described by Maria when she said they're collecting our data, our private data, they're creating a clone of every one of us, and then they are basically offering that information to the advertising industry. They have convinced the advertising industry that this is the most efficient way of advertising, which is controversial, but you can't prove it because you don't have access to the data. And that is taking away revenue that used to benefit free media outlets. And this is one of the causes of the funding crisis we have been discussing this morning. That's the first reason. The second reason is because tech giants have chosen polarization. Therefore, their algorithms disseminate content that polarizes, and that polarizes on the basis of anger and fear. This is the Paleolithic biology we still have. Why do they do that? Because eliciting emotions like fear and anger, we tend to act. Acting in the internet means interacting with content. That means we stay on that platform longer, and the platform can show us more ads. So polarization increases the profits of these platforms. And that is a threat to democracy. And I am also convinced, like Maria, that the demise of democracy that we have seen before is connected to the rise of the tech giants. That is a problem for journalism as well, because journalism has to follow, and journalism also has to move to ever more polarizing messages. It's also a problem for political parties. This is something political parties in Eastern Europe have already brought to European institutions as a problem in 2019, saying if we don't have polarizing extremist messages, people don't even see our posts in the internet. And this is where it comes all together, and this is why we need to regulate the business model, and we need to regulate access to the data, more transparency in order then to find out how exactly to regulate platforms.
Paul Nedregotten, representing here the Norwegian media landscape, how would you describe the relationship between Norwegian media and the tech platforms?
I think Facebook describes it best themselves. It's complicated. So first of all, I mean, I think Maria's statement is fairly uncontroversial at this point in time, right? We all know this. And I'm very aware of sitting here as a representative of the Norwegian media, listening to Maria, listening to Bruce talking about, what's happening in Africa, representing a fairly peaceful corner of the world, right? But I think it's really important to be aware that the forces working in the Philippines, in Africa, in America, in the UK is also at work here. And it's sort of, I think your point in terms of the financing of media is an extremely important point for Norway and for many, many others, because funding journalism, funding local journalism is crucial to have vital democratic institutions locally. We now know a lot about how strong local media underpins local democracy. And if local media outlets, newspapers or whatever, disappear, local democracy is also undermined. So this is very much something that we feel every single day in our work here in Norway as well, but certainly not fortunately, not to the degree that you do in the Philippines.
You're so lucky. No, but you're right.
We are in so many ways in Norway, and before lunch we did hear several speakers talking repeatedly about how the business model of free independent media is being threatened. Nedergotten, can I challenge you to explain how it is threatened by the digital media landscape, the digital communication platforms?
Right. So Maria used the term death by a thousand cuts, right? But it's very much, first of all, I mean, I think we all have a fairly good understanding of how we should proceed strategically, right? And I think we made, at least in the Norwegian media market, and I think elsewhere as well, we made some strategic mistakes in the past. One of the things that I'm certain we didn't make a strategic mistake on is to go for the subscription economy in newspapers in Norway. I mean, we are probably the healthiest ecosystem in terms of financing here in Norway at the moment, right? But I think we made two mistakes. I think we made one strategic mistake in terms of putting all of our eggs in the basket of the technology vendors in advertising. We don't control the advertising infrastructure in Norway. And I think that is a very expensive mistake.
Who controls it then?
Excuse me?
Who controls it?
Well, these days, Google, essentially. But I mean, it's complicated, but you know, the giants do, right? I mean, Google is on essentially all parts of the table. They sell advertising, they run the advertising networks, they have the advertising systems that we utilize. They run the cloud services that we use, right? So essentially they're on all sides of the table. And we have, I must say, we have great dialogue with Google. I mean, they're great guys, they're good guys. I mean, I firmly believe that these people, they want to do good. But I think on a strategic level, the way the technology is working is benefiting us, but it's benefiting them far more. And I think that was a strategic mistake that we made here in Norway and elsewhere. There was a window 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and we didn't take them. The second strategic mistake, and I think we are sort of living that at the moment as well. Maria said that Rappler were created on Facebook. I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were part of the cheerleaders in terms of, you know, look at this great place, right? We have to be here because all of our readers are there. And I think we at the moment, you know, the young are fleeing Facebook at the moment, right? So we are discussing how should we act, where should we be on Snapchat and on TikTok, right? So we are sort of, we are sort of, you know, putting our editorial control content onto these platforms. We are strengthening them in many ways on a strategic level. So tactically, it probably makes sense, right? Because we are getting something in return. Strategically, long term,
In the larger picture.
it's complicated.
It's complicated, noted. I have a theory, and that is that it is very unlikely that we all are going to log off Facebook and the other big tech platforms tomorrow. They are great services in many ways, and also, again, our most important communication infrastructure.
Those of us publishing newspaper would beg to differ.
That is, yeah, we can discuss that later. But given that we're not going to all log off, what are the most important measures that can be taken to actually regulate these digital platforms? And Ressa, you've been working a lot on this in Europe, so I would like to challenge you.
Yeah, we are actually doing this with the Digital Services Act, which is a piece of legislation already approved, and it will start entering into force in 2023 and another part in 2024, more or less. So this is already existing. It's a global European standard. It's a European standard, but I mean, all of the world is looking at it. Even US legislators are extremely interested. It's 300 pages, so I'll just focus on the aspects that I think are extremely important. There are first limitations to surveillance advertising. So it's saying you can't use sensitive data. Sensitive data is data like your sexual orientation, your political orientation, your religious faith, trade union. In fact, if you're a member of a trade union, you can't use that for profiling you, for that clone, I love that term, that Maria described, for advertising. And you can't use children's data for advertising. So this is the first recognition that there is a problem, that this is a harmful practice to collect people's private data in order to modify their behavior commercially. But I think the second step will be to say, well, even if you use those data in order to optimize your recommender system, what kind of content you send to those people, this is harmful as well. What is maybe also important is we are tackling that information asymmetry. Peter Pomerantsev said this morning, these companies know everything about us, and we don't know anything. You know, if I read the newspaper, I know who owns that newspaper, what his political or commercial interest might be. With the platforms, we don't know. So we have introduced risk assessments for the very large online platforms, so Google, Facebook, for example, Instagram, TikTok. So they have to assess the risk that they pose in terms of vis-a-vis fundamental rights, public discourse, public health, human dignity, violence against women, a whole series of very important aspects. I think we should have had independent risk assessments, but I think there was a lot of development while we were working on the legislation because of Maria Ressa's contributions, because Frances Hogan came out, and therefore the European institutions, the Parliament and the Council recognized that actually these risk assessments had to be a lot broader than they were conceived in the first proposal of the Commission, so there's still a lot ongoing. So we have these broad risk assessments, we have independent audits. This is extremely important because so far we have no way of independently assessing, evaluating what these platforms are doing. Not sure whether these independent audits will work perfectly in the first year, but we have this principle that they have to be audited independently. We have the possibility for the European Commission as oversight institution and for national enforcement bodies to access the platform's data. And this is really revolutionary. We don't have that anywhere so far. In Europe, it will be possible for certain purposes, for very clear rules and limits to access the platform's data to see what they're actually doing and whether they're saying the truth. And Frances Hogan has told us they're not telling us the truth. So now we can check this. And we have independent research institutions who can do research projects and access the platform's data. They have to be vetted as researchers. There are limits to this, but we will have the possibility finally to have independent research looking into it. And also civil society organizations will have a more limited way, but they will have the right to at least use the data that is openly accessible and do their research, which currently is not the case because Facebook are threatening them with litigation. So these affirmations that we are making, we will be able to have the evidence for that and to tell the story based on the data, and I think that is extremely important. And therefore, we will also be able to figure out what exactly are the mechanisms that are so harmful, that promote all that harmful content, all that disinformation, all that hateful speech. And we will be able to regulate in a very balanced way, keeping the benefits of social networks being this great place to exchange information, maybe going back in some way to the hopes we had in the 90s, in the internet. But throwing out the bad stuff and saving us from global dictatorships.
Yes, please.
So I would suggest a friend and I who works in one of these tech companies, we were having a discussion of what things they can do. Please consider, it's addictive. It's mildly addictive. It's physiologically, it changes you, your levels, your hormone levels, and certain things shift when you're on it. I mean, one of the things, remember, we have rules for what age you can have alcohol. There are rules for nicotine, for tobacco. And I don't have my phone with me, one of the rare times I don't, but, maybe there should be an age when, because it is extremely harmful to the next generation. This attention economy sucks their time, and where we spend our time is what gives our lives meaning. And on these companies have atomized meaning to the point that, if you're a young kid, and this Frances Haugen's paper showed that, the one she released, more of them are committing. I mean, there's so many harms there. So one, that cell phone that you have is dangerous. That it isn't actually harmless, and that the idea that it is harmless is part of what makes it more dangerous.
Yeah. So an age limit on smartphones.
Imagine, like, again, Soma, right? Like, it is a drug, and we are changed by it. Journalism is changed by it. We have been commodified, and it's a push and pull. It's a distribution platform, but then it also encourages us when Facebook, I sound like I'm only against Facebook here, but equal opportunity. We're partners with all of them. I mean, Rappler, but when they said that the video was going to be it and they released numbers, publishers all around the world got rid of people who were in editorial and hired video people, but yet those numbers of video were inflated by up to 900%. No one's been held responsible for that.
I would like to just take us back to the main topic of today, freedom of expression. Maria Ressa, the regulations that are in the Digital Services Act, which Alexandra has explained for us, would that actually make a difference for our freedom of expression online?
I wish it came out last year. Yes, but not enough. Yes, but not enough. And really, the problem is that you have the people who are making the decisions in the technology companies having two dual roles, which is shareholder profits, which is far more potent than protecting the public sphere, because there's no law to stop that impunity. So please.
Paul Ledergotten, what about the Norwegian media? I mean, the kind of regulation that we're hearing about, which is also going to be Norwegian law in 2024 probably. How will it change the Norwegian media in this situation?
So I think that remains to be seen in practice. I think there are, it's great, right? I mean, we welcome it. So I just want to go back a few years when you guys implemented the GDPR, right?
Yeah, that wasn't so good.
That is beginning to work now, right? So we sort of see the impact of GDPR many years later. And I think some of the impact that we will see from DMA and DSA, we won't be seeing for a number of years. I mean, there are certainly parts of the DMA and the DSA that I would, love to see differently shaped. But I think it's a necessary first start. There are parts of the DMA and the DSA that I think, we should have done this instead, right? But that's part of democracy. Legislation comes from a process where, we shape these things together and we learn. And one of the things that creating that kind of legislation valid for all of Europe. I mean, Italy is a completely different beast than Norway, right? And things that I would love to see applicable to Norway is something that, you can't do that, right? So one of the things that we would have loved to see is, we have independently vetted journalism, right? We have a media law here in Norway that is actually, putting guidelines in place for us, right? And we have an ethical framework here in Norway that would, I think, could be utilized for us to publish on Facebook without them vetting us. And I know that was one part of the major part of the discussion, and it was removed because, other countries. but there are things there that I would love to see, but it's a great start. And I really, really welcome the work you've been doing.
We have to wind up this part, but I would like to give you one final challenge. This is an important few months, really, for the discussion on freedom of expression and digitalization in Norway. There are two commissions who are coming out, or have come out, which are relevant. There's also a discussion in Parliament about regulating big tech. If you can give Norwegian decision makers one challenge or one call to action in one sentence, what would that be? And I will start with you.
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think So you want a tabloid formulation now. But I
Yes,
think
please.
one of the things that I would love to see is Norwegian regulators actually showing a lot more interest in the topics, because it's bloody difficult to understand, right? Yeah. And getting to the core of that, and talk to us, use us. I think we could be having great dialogue that would push the boundaries of what's possible within Norwegian society and within the EU framework coming out with the DMA and the DSA. I mean, that would certainly be my hope for what should be coming next.
Alexandra Gese.
Can I have 3?
Very short ones.
Go in the direction of the DSA, but go beyond in terms of commercial surveillance. Get rid of commercial surveillance, totally. Second one, get even more transparency, same direction, but take out the exception for trade secrets. Do it strong and give NGOs access to, especially here in Norway. Third one, get a really, really strong enforcement, because general data protection regulation was mentioned. We probably wouldn't have all these problems if we really totally enforced GDPR also against the tech giants, and not only against our kids' soccer clubs. So strong enforcement. Thank you.
Maria, the final word.
The surveillance one was what I was going to put in, but look, Autocracy Inc. is winning, and the weaknesses of these platforms, their vulnerabilities are being exploited, and that is the reason why you are seeing Autocracy Inc., Anne Applebaum's piece, they're winning. And by 2024, they will shift the power balance. Fascism will win, democracy will die. So act now. I think the last part, the late Madeleine Albright said this. She said, it's happening in front of our eyes. Fascism is plucking one feather at a time of a chicken. Another way of saying death by 1,000 cuts. And there's that naked chicken. You know what? This is it. So please, this is what I've spent the last 2 years focused on, because not only do we individually have to call for better, but governments, democracy-loving governments must step up. Otherwise, it'll be too late.
Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause to the panel.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Ingrid Stolpestad from Amnesty for moderating this discussion in such a great manner. Amnesty, by the way, is also a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And I know that Amnesty and Maria and the rest of this panel and everybody who has been on this stage today will keep on struggling for these issues in the time to come. The Freedom of Expression conference is coming to an end. But to close off, we will welcome Executive Director Kjersti Fløgstad back on stage with her closing remarks. Kjersti.
Thank you so much, Ingvild, and thank you so much to all the speakers. It's been a wonderful few hours today discussing the connection between expression of freedom, democracy, and peace, and I think the issue has been very well presented. We started off with journalism and journalism under pressure. And why is it so? Well, it was clearly linked to authoritarian regimes not wanting people to have the truth. But it's also a mixture and a cocktail with the social media growing that makes the whole business model of independent media being outperformed by the social media platforms. And again, we can see that authoritarian leaders would gain on that because they would not want to support the independent media because they want their truth. So again, this is a very dangerous cocktail, as also Maria pointed out very clearly, talking about the elections coming up in the next years ahead of us. The minister told us that 70% of the world's population today live in authoritarian countries under authoritarian leadership. 70%. So, and maybe we are counting it's growing. But then I want to draw attention to what I really appreciated with this conference today, and that was very well captured by you, Ulrich. You said, hope is a strategy. And I think we should leave with that in mind, that hope is a strategy, and it is up to us. And especially, I think many said that during the day, especially in times where things are very bleak and dangerous, it's a call to all of us to think about hope, think about the future that we want. We can all do something as persons, as journalists, as was pointed out. How do we actually perform our work? As businesses, how do we take responsibility? And as governments. And I think that was one of the key takeaways for me today anyway. The sense of hope, the sense of action, and the sense of it's possible. It's not only about problems, how things are dangerously interconnected, but we are as human beings also connected, and we can do something with it. Later, in just a few minutes, we're also going to show you or present to you a 10-point plan to address our informational crisis, which will be something that we're coming out of this conference as an action for good. But before we do that, my warmest welcome to Vidar Helgesen. He's Executive Director of the Nobel Foundation in Stockholm. And you will tell us a little bit how you are going to also take this forward, going forward in the Nobel sphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Kjersti. Yes, the Nobel Prize comprises, of course, the Peace Prize. It comprises science, several science prizes, and literature, culture. And in all these fields, the battle against truth, the erosion of truth, the truth decay, is a threat. So this is definitely of relevance, not only to the Peace Prize, to democracy and human rights, but also to making human progress. And we know today that we're facing a perfect storm of problems. And I'm not going to mention all of them because you all know them. But what we also know is that to combat those problems, we need more science, we need unified political action, we need international collaboration, and in order to have all that, we need fundamental freedoms. And today we see erosions of those freedoms. We see nationalism, populism, polarized politics, broken politics, authoritarian politics. And we see what the UN Secretary General, in a report to the General Assembly last year, called the war on science. So these are issues that are key, that are very much to the heart of the Nobel Prize and the credo of Alfred Nobel, to honor those who strive for the greatest benefit to humankind. And many of these problems are indeed related, as Maria Ressa said, to the state of our information ecosystem. As Maria said in her Nobel lecture last year, an atomic bomb has exploded in our information ecosystem. Now, 100 years before Maria Ressa received the Nobel Prize, a fairly well-known gentleman received the Nobel Prize. And I just came in from Zurich this morning because yesterday I attended a celebratory conference to mark 100 years since Albert Einstein received the Nobel Prize. Now, he was a scientist, but he was deeply concerned as a scientist with the search for truth. He advocated that the search for truth is even more important than the possession of truth. And he didn't confine himself to science. He was a humanist, he was an internationalist, and he was even concerned about some of his own support to research into the nuclear bomb. And in 1955, Einstein and Bertrand Russell presented a manifesto arguing and advocating that governments needed to settle conflicts peacefully because what a nuclear-armed war would mean to humanity would be catastrophic. And it struck me, hearing about the 10-point plan that Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov are going to present here, that Russell-Einstein Declaration of 1955, which led to the Pugwash movement, that in turn actually received the Peace Prize many years later, that movement took on itself to educate world leaders, to make them understand what the scourge of a nuclear war would mean. And it was said here by the representative from the Norwegian media companies that we need leaders to understand what this is all about. And I think that is an essential role. And maybe 50 years from now, the 10-point plan that we're going to hear about will be known as, not as the Russell-Einstein Declaration or Manifesto, but the Ressa-Muratov Manifesto that led to a campaign to educate world leaders about the threat to humanity that this atomic bomb in our information ecosystem is actually about. We will certainly take this forward. Next year, the Nobel Foundation, in partnership with the US National Academy of Sciences, will hold in May in Washington a Nobel Prize summit with the theme Trust, Truth, and Hope. And hope is indeed a strategy. We need to mobilize for the scientific method, for critical thinking, for peaceful, constructive political dialogue to address those momentous challenges that we have before us. And as part of that mobilization, we need to fight all those evils that we've heard enough about today. So I pledge that we will take this agenda forward, and we look forward to continued partnership with Maria, Dmitry Muratov, and a range of other laureates across all the or the Nobel Prize disciplines. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vidar. And I think we can trust now that the theme of truth and trust and democracy will stay on the agenda in the Nobel system for the years to come. But before we end, I want to re-invite Maria Ressa up on the stage, bringing with her the 10-point plan to address our information crisis that you've heard so much about. It's there.
Yes, yes, this is it, 10 points.
Why do we need it, Maria?
Much as the EU's, the DSA, and much as these laws are kicking in, right, there's still a lot more to be done. And that's part of what the 10 points will point out. And, you know, kudos to the Peace Institute, the Peace Center, for pulling this together, for pulling all of us together around it. It pulls together some of the work of the Forum on Information and Democracy, on the real, oh my God, there's so many, but it pulls it all together.
And it's building on the work of yourself and Dmitry Muratov, and it's been formulated with the aid of Reporters Without Borders and Illuminate Strategic Initiatives. And now it's up to you and everybody who has endorsed it and signed it. It's been signed by 11 Nobel Peace Prize laureates so far, still counting, and 90 individuals and organizations.
Including some from the Philippines. Yes, please read through it. I just want to kind of give you the bullet points. Yes. The very first one is, bring an end to the surveillance for profit business model. It hasn't been stated that abruptly. One person has, Shoshana Zuboff, who's part of the, well, she's working on a whole lot of things, but I think we need to say it, right? We can't slice a salami, we can't pluck the chicken feather by feather. We don't have enough time. The second, end tech discrimination and treat people everywhere equally. That sounds normal. That's certainly in laws of democratic nations. The third is good for journalism. Rebuild independent journalism as the antidote to tyranny. And that doesn't start the 10 points yet. Those are only the main kind of buckets. But you know, among the 10 points are many of the things that I see the people in this room, many of you have worked for. So please, those watching, look it up and sign.
You can look it up online. You will find the URL, I think, on the screen soon. And people are invited to support it, right?
Absolutely. Please. It's one of the action points that you can do. Build your mesh, create them, link them together. I think we can build a global mesh. And then hopefully, you know, the UN Secretary General has actually pulled a team together to look at technology. The International Fund for Public Interest Media is trying to get democratic nations to pull together and help independent media survive. There are lots of initiatives all around the world. Let's pull them together and sprint. Sprint, we gotta run.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your
Thank
commitment.
you. Thank you so much.
You can just stay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your commitment, and good luck with your work going forward. And thank you to all our speakers today, and everyone that was here present at the Nobel Peace Center, and all of you watching from around the globe. You can support the plan, as Maria said, on our website, and showing maybe not on the screen yet, no, either. Thank you for joining our Freedom of Expression conference, and thank you so much for spending the day with us, and goodbye for now, and safe travels home. Thank you.